outdated, inaccurate, and unsafe to use, we just summarized the biggest problems with optimizing language models to run generative AIs. Deasie is about to change that for us. Are we looking at a new era of data governance in the paradigm of generative AI? Quite possibly. In the past, startups like OpenAI have been under fire for being highly secretive about how they're essentially training their language models. In particular, after the release of GPT-4, the Microsoft-backed company only publicized very ambiguous mechanisms on how the efficiency of ChatGPT was improved overall. OpenAI's transparency report didn't yield much either. Experts called it a bunch of words strung together. To make matters worse, OpenAI was cited as the sole author of the report, which is pretty controversial. This probably means that OpenAI didn't run their data governance strategies by independent researchers who don't have a monetary incentive to sing the company's praises. But even if they did, the creators of GPT-4 refused to make that information public. Needless to say, that's a bad precedent to set. This is where Deasie comes in. The company's founders Reese Griffiths, Mikko Peponen, and Leo Platzer have a history of building data governance tools together at McKinsey. So, of course, they know a thing or two about inaccurate or unreliable generative AI insights. But of course, other than a grave quality issue, there are some ethical paradigms too. Just from an ethical perspective, the company has an absolute responsibility to reveal how they're training their models. Because once we analyze the ethics of their training strategies, only then can we comment on the reliability of the results curated by generative AI. You can probably test this out, but even today, ChatGPT falters in providing accurate citations for an academic text that it has produced. There's a huge chance that GPT will retrieve absolutely bogus sources from literature that don't even exist. This common phenomenon shows us that even the most sophisticated generative AI isn't in tune with its language models and algorithms. The question of how GPT knows what it knows remains standing. The lack of transparency is also about the overall quality of Gen AI and how it can be adapted for bigger purposes than asking GPT to write a paper on Shakespeare for your literature class. That's precisely why Deasie is gaining popularity in the generative AI circles. How Deasie works. Deasie's job is fairly simple but critically important. But first and foremost, it is not a generative AI tool itself. As per a statement from the founders of the company, we saw in early 2023 that the single greatest blocker to reliable and scalable adoption of generative AI was the inability for enterprises to identify the right set of documents that should be used for a given application. What Deasie does is that it makes large language models more reliable for wide industry uses. The former McKinsey trio has built a product that equips itself with an enterprise's unstructured and uncategorized data to organize it according to various metrics. For instance, it will structure the data according to its importance for a certain operation or overall sensitivity. So, you're basically looking at a sophisticated and futuristic tool to categorize data ethically, something OpenAI struggles with. Let's say the way Deasie's algorithms are trained, it would opt out of using proprietary information to train the large language models ethically. This auto-tagging system of documents and other data also helps the LLM in extracting more reliable and accurate insight. The results that a generative AI would yield won't just come out of nowhere. In fact, Deasie would ensure that the generative tool only prioritizes corresponding data according to its relevance and gravitas. The crux of this entire process is quite simple. Deasie would help generative AI to make accurate assessments about which chunk of data will essentially feed the text generative model. And believe it or not, Deasie will actually be one of the few companies to take note of bad data governance in generative AI use on an enterprise level. But experts see the company's potential mainly because strict data governance is perhaps exactly what generative AI needs. It's not hard to see that so far, AI startups have let their large language models run loose. Even GPT is grappling with producing out-of-touch and outdated results. And when we don't have any info on how exactly OpenAI is training its LLM, it's a problem. Enterprise generative AI. If big companies like OpenAI want ChatGPT to find a commercial and more macro usage, Deasie might be a blessing in disguise. The biggest problem behind generative AI's disconnect with big enterprise and corporate structures is its reliability or conflicting information. At McKinsey, the Deasie trio had experienced that untrained generative AI is susceptible to producing bad insights. And that was a mountain of a problem to solve. According to Rhys Griff, one of Deasie's founders, enterprises have enormous volumes of unstructured data that have rarely received any attention from a governance perspective. The probability that language models retrieve answers that don't make sense or are exposing sensitive information scales with the volume of data. And it makes absolute sense why data utilized for enterprise needs more scrutiny than generative AI's personal micro-level usage. For the most part, the added sophistication of generative tools has prompted us to accept their validity and accuracy. Industries that completely rely on analytics to make their focal decisions need generative AI to do more about giving reliable results. So far, you don't have a singular, efficient approach to measure or determine the quality and relevance of uncategorized data and documents. And the truth is, enterprise generative AI like that of OpenAI can't simply rely on working with the best possible datasets. For generative AI to yield more accuracy, it needs to opt into a structural data governance mechanism. And sure, this is a pretty novel approach, but Deasie's expanding rapidly to partner up with major LLMs like ChatGPT. It's a no-brainer that the company's launch was well received by the biggest stakeholders in the industry. According to the startup's founders, within 3 weeks of launching, we are in active discussions with 25-plus enterprises, including 5 Fortune 500 companies, had inbound from America's 2 largest banks, and are planning our first 2 pilots with a $4 billion manufacturer and India's largest law firm. Those figures just show that the AI paradigm was desperately lacking important emphasis on data governance. Not to mention, Deasie was successful in raising $2.9 million in a seed funding round with participation from Y Combinator, General Catalyst, RTP Global, Rebel Fund, and J12 Ventures. What's really going to shock you is the fact that Deasie, so far, only has 3 employees, aka its owners. But of course, as the company grows, the trio is looking forward to making strategic hirings and growing its engineering team. Experts are awaiting to see how Deasie's success would look in the generative AI world dominated by GPT-4. OpenAI already has an enterprise version of GPT-4 that promises data reliability, security, and privacy, powerful data analysis tools, and overall improved complexity of the large language model. Yet the core problems with generative AI still exist. Companies are unsure about GPT's capacity to use their sensitive data to train language models or make unauthorized use of personal data. With these major concerns around, Deasie's integration in GPT-4 sounds like a dream. However, it is also a competition of its own kind. The undeniable popularity of Deasie shows that there's a visible problem with data governance and big LLMs, a claim that OpenAI would swiftly deny. Regardless, Deasie's owners have identified an integral market gap. And for generative AI like GPT-4, that's a problem.